All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and being here on time. And joining IEC's Transportation Town Hall today. My name is Danny Robles, and apologies for jumping ahead. My name is Danny. I am IEC's Climate Policy Director. And I am excited tonight to be your host for our town hall. While we wait for more folks to arrive, I'd just like to make a couple quick announcements and reminders for folks. The town hall is being recorded tonight. It is for IC's website and will be available for our community to listen to a later date or for any other references. So if you're uncomfortable being on camera, this is your chance to turn off. Additionally, all attendees are muted by default. Please use the chat function to ask questions, add comments, or provide resources. And we will be taking live questions at the end of our session. So for those joining by phone, I don't see many people joining by phone just yet, but please use *9 to raise your hand. And finally, we ask folks to maintain the conversation civil and cordial tonight. This is an educational event to learn more about the work that IC and our partners will be engaging in the legislative session in 2024 as it relates to transportation. So any profanity, personal attacks, or disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. And once again, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight and tuning into our Transportation Town Hall. Before we fully get started, I'd like to remind folks a little bit about the mission that we have here at IEC. Since 1975, the Illinois Environmental Council has worked to safeguard its people, its plants, animals, and natural systems in which all life depends by building power for people and the environment. And we represent over 100 organizations operating across Illinois. And we carry our mission with our partners to ensure, we're jumping a little bit ahead, sorry, y'all. We carry our mission by advancing public policies that create healthy environments and maintain education, advocacy, and movement building across Illinois for our environment. And tonight, I want to really layer on the home why we're having this conversation. A focus of tonight is how we as environmentalists can impact the transportation sector to create climate solutions for all of us. Transportation right now is the largest source of greenhouse emissions in the country and Illinois. As y'all can see from the chart, 33% of total emissions come from the transportation sector, and we need to look at every avenue possible to reduce this number by 2050. That includes investing in public transit, other modes of mobility to ensure we have the tools to track the metrics that our investments will have on our community, and also think of the many tactics that we can use to get our goals over the finish line. The environmental community across Illinois can help advocate for transportation agencies and other environmental agencies like IDOT, IEPA, and RTA to prioritize the environment and racial equity as they determine how to spend federal transportation funds as well as state funds. And additionally, we can make a lot of headway by advocating for our legislators to pass laws that help reduce pollution and emissions in our transportation sector. Now, tonight, we're lucky to have one of those transportation allies in the legislation. I don't see Senator Villavalum on just yet, but he will be speaking to us a little bit later to remind us why this is important. Senator Villavalum is no stranger in rolling up his sleeves and getting to work for the health and well-being of the people in Illinois, having helped IC pass the Health and Soils Water Act last year. He recently earned the Milestone Achievement Award at this year's Environmental Leadership Dinner, and we will be hearing from him in just shortly once he's able to join us tonight. In the meantime, though, I do want to introduce our participants or our presenters tonight. Tonight, we are lucky to have three lead advocates in transportation advocacy. With us tonight, we have Amy Reinell, who is the Executive Director for Active Transportation Alliance, where she leads the organization's mission to advocate for walking, bicycling, and public transit to create healthy and sustainable and equitable communities. Active Transportation Alliance envisions a Chicagoland that is fun and healthy place to live, work, and play. Alongside with our executive director, Jen Walling, Amy was also part of the steering committee for Chicago Metropolitan Agency's planning stakeholder group to help develop the plan of action for regional transit, which we'll hear a little bit more about today. Additionally, we have Mohammed Patel, who is a member of the Clean Vehicles and Fuels team at NRDC, or the Natural Resources Defense Council, working closely with the Midwest Climate and Clean Energy team to advance policies and programs and standards to help decarbonize the transportation sector. Mohammed is responsible for engaging at the state level clean car, clean truck rules to equitably transition the Midwest to zero emission vehicles, working on policies to accelerate EV charging infrastructure deployment in the Midwest, and advocating for programs to support equitable transition to clean vehicles. And rounding out our panel tonight is Larissa Kohler, who is a senior attorney and director for vehicle electrification. Larissa engages in zero emission vehicle policymaking across the US at the state and federal level, including California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. And big part of her mission is to ensure we have clean, cost-effective, and equitable transition to zero emission trucks and buses. She is based out of Chicago. So I think we are still waiting on Senator Villabaum. So we're gonna get started with our first presenter. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I'm gonna turn it over to Amy to kick us off tonight.
Thank you, Danny. I am going to paste a link in the chat to the Plan of Action for Regional Transit on CMAP's homepage. If you scroll through that page, you will learn more than you ever thought you could about the situation facing public transportation in our region. So I put that link there, but I will summarize a lot of what we learned and where we're heading very quickly. Let me share my screen. Actually, I can't share my screen anymore, Danny. So do you want to share my screen? Oh, maybe when the recording started. Oh, hang on. I think I got it. Okay, I got it. Back. Action for Regional Transit. We were responding to a legislator-driven ask to address the multiple crises facing our regional transit system. These crises are well documented if you look at budgets and if you look at the data on how the systems are performing. And they're especially well documented when you see all across social media and all across every engagement that we do and some others on this call do about the rider experience, and all of you who take public transportation. I'm just going to read this one quote because I think it summarizes sort of where we're at today. This is actually one of our campaign organizers, and he was testifying at a briefing of legislators, and he said, "I'm here today because Southside seniors shouldn't have to make 2 transfers and ride 3 buses that are consistently unreliable to get their prescriptions. The current public transportation experience turns trips into an endurance test of snail-like bus speeds and long, frustrating waits to make transfers." This is something that's echoed in a lot of different ways about the system we have today. So through a process that, as Danny said, Jen Walling has been involved in, Jackie Grimshaw, who's here today as well, has been involved in, Laura Wilkinson from CMAP helped lead. We dug deep into the system. Do you want me to pause there, Danny, for Senator?
Yeah. We can jump back into it. I think connecting right now is Senator Villalobos. Senator, welcome tonight, and we're excited to hear the introduction to tonight's town hall for ISC's transportation sector conversation. So, Senator, we'll turn it over to you. I know you're just jumping in here with us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you all. I apologize for the delay and I apologize for the setting. I'm actually at a event for the gun violence prevention pack this evening. But I did step out. I did want to participate. And first and foremost, thank you for, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm trying to let them know, my staff know that I am good and I no longer need the passcode for this Zoom. Um, I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you for your interest and thank you for your advocacy around this particular issue. There is, I'm chair of transportation in the Senate. There is a number of ways to look at transportation and infrastructure in our city, county, and state. We've had a number of conversations as it relates to roads and bridges and vertical infrastructure and much more. Um, and there are absolutely conversations that have taken place as it relates to transit. And so much so that, each year we move the needle, whether it's in the Rebuild Illinois Capital Bill, putting dedicated funding for the first time ever towards pedestrian and bike infrastructure, whether it's each year looking at different pieces of legislation. This past year, we passed a public transit omnibus that reduced or eliminated transit barriers and put in place some accountability mechanisms for our public transit, or providing transit as a pre-tax benefit. So there's different ways that we're continuing to address um, infrastructure and transportation as a whole. However, the spotlight on public transit could not be more timely. We are at a moment in time where every major public transit agency in the nation is facing a huge decline in ridership, and as a result, a fiscal cliff as to how we fund our public transit due to that decline. And quite frankly, this is something that I think was going to happen. I think experts would say it would happen um, over the course of the next decade, as uh, the nature of the workday and remote work came into place and changed, I should say. And so, the reality is the pandemic just expedited that situation and this conversation. Uh, this might be touched on, but just a few facts, right? One is in the RTA region, there will be a $730 million fiscal cliff come 2026. That's what the estimates are. Two, we are engaging in many, many conversations like this one across the RTA region in Springfield, with the city, with the county, with the collar counties, as to how we move forward, right? We need a public transit system that is robust, that is fully funded, that is reliable, that is safe, that's accessible, equitable, and environmentally conscious. These are all attributes that our constituents, our residents, you all on the phone are asking, right? We want to make sure that as we move to this next phase of how we ensure we have a robust system, that we address the challenges that the system has and are responding to what our constituents would like to see. Our constituents do not want to stand behind a CTA bus as it drives off. Why? Because they'll be inhaling a lot of diesel, right? And so the challenge that's before us is, how do we put this together? How do we put together a transit system that it maintains the ridership that it currently has, but expands it and makes it such that people want to ride and also invest, even if you're not a rider, in a public transit system. And so this is a challenge that we're going to go through. We're going to have many conversations. CMAP, at the direction of the Illinois General Assembly, has started us off by gathering experts and members of the different boards and putting a report together that was voted on early October. We're going to receive that report, the Illinois General Assembly and the governor, and we are from there, I think, going to hold committee hearings over the course of the next year and have conversations like this one as to how we get down to the nitty-gritty of how we're going to do this. And so I am really excited about that opportunity. I think that we have members in the Illinois General Assembly that are prepared to speak about revenue and speak about governance and other areas of this system. I will say that they want to make sure that we're putting in place the reforms and the policy that reflects what we're hearing from our constituents. And that's where you all come in tenfold, right? If the Illinois Environmental Council and its allies, and I consider myself an ally as well, get together and create a policy platform that specifically indicates this is what we would like to see in a public transit system, making sure that we have zero emissions, making sure that accessibility means accessibility, making sure that we're complementing our public transit system with bike and pedestrian infrastructure. These are all different ways that I think we can address the environmental impact that exists from our transportation infrastructure system in the state of Illinois. And so the more organized and harder you all push and advocate, the stronger the solution is going to be, because we are ready and willing to work on the funding. We want to make sure, though, that we're putting in place the reforms and policies that complement the funding, that are speaking to the direct needs and requests of our constituents. So I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. I know that I give a quick synopsis and kind of hopefully urged you all to keep going and doing what you're doing, because this is that important.
We really appreciate those words, Senator, and you're more than just an ally. You're one of our strongest advocates down in Springfield. We were really happy to be able to give you the milestone award this past year, and we know that this is just more work ahead of us. We're ready to roll up the sleeves, and we have a couple really key advocates here who are going to help us move the conversation across the state to make sure that we're building the awareness behind all the different policy solutions. But I think with this fiscal cliff, like, it's very evident that the conversation's upon us, and we'll do everything we can to gain a few more allies for you at the Senate.
That's huge. And again, just want to say thank you for your interest and your advocacy. We've come a long way, and we have more to do. And I'll just make one final point and say, you said it, it's not just about the RTA region. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that we need to ensure we have a statewide, transit strategy and platform. And that's one of the things I love about this organization. And so to that point, I'll just say that the rest of the state isn't facing the same type of funding challenge. However, they are facing challenges, and we need to identify those. And we're in this together as a whole state.
Definitely are. And once again, thank you so much for taking some time tonight to give us some great words of advice, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into what the CMAP report entails with the rest of our presenters. And thank you once again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And with that, I'll transition you back to Amy, Amy, you were already starting to give us a little bit more of that insight.
Awesome. So if you haven't already been convinced, let me see, wait, can you guys see that okay? There we go.
Yeah, yeah.
If we haven't been convinced, we are in a moment where transit needs a lot of help. Our system has been underfunded for decades. The operating budget gap is anticipated to be over $700 million by 2026. And it's important to say that even though our federal government is a huge player in our transportation ecosystem, they do not provide any money for operating transit outside of extraordinary moments like COVID. So that is what has been keeping us afloat, is COVID dollars over these last few years, and those are fading away. Services in the system, as the quote at the beginning of my presentation elucidated, are not optimal. They have been cut. And this graphic, which I know is a lot to digest, shows you that the cuts have been going on for a long time, since our last big transit financial crisis, and those services have never been restored. And so what we're experiencing today as riders is much reduced service, and we feel that in a host of ways. And those service cuts, the unreliability, safety concerns have led to ridership declines beyond what had already happened with COVID. And as a result, our roadway congestion is worse than ever, and our GHGs from transportation at a time when our vehicles are cleaner and more efficient is far worse, because people are driving more miles when they otherwise would be taking transit. There are a number of different reasons why we're in this financial pinch. One of them is related to the fact that our state has not invested in our region's transit system in the way that it should. So you can just see this very simple comparison to other major urban transportation systems. Everyone else, their states are putting a lot more money in the game, and in some cases, like 3 times, 4 times more money. If you go to transit systems in Illinois outside of Chicago, the state provides considerable support, up to 65% of operational support for those smaller systems, but it doesn't do that in Chicago. We're not going to get into all the reasons why today, but it's a big piece of the problem. And that is why this campaign right now is focusing on state investment as a key piece of the solution. We're here today looking at transit through a climate lens. We will not reduce GHG emissions from transportation in our region without transit. Transit is one of our most powerful tools. That said, there are a lot of people who need transit for reasons beyond climate, including their ability to get around and maintain their independence as a senior, as someone who does not drive, as someone who has a disability that prevents them from driving. Transit is a key mobility option for people to meet their most basic needs. When we look at that big gap, that growing budget gap in operations, there's a not insignificant part of it that relates to mandated programs for people who really need and rely on transit as their primary or only transportation solution. So paratransit is our federally mandated program for people with disabilities to get their needs met. And then there's a slew of discounted fare and free fare programs that the state has created through law that we offer, that are absolutely critical for veterans, for seniors, and for other groups. Even programs were created by state law, the state's not paying for them. So you can see here, those blue slices are what the state is contributing to those mandatory programs that are a lifeline for all the people who use them. We are an aging state, and as people age, we see an increase in people with disabilities and a decrease in people driving, and a huge increased reliance on paratransit. So a piece of the solution here is addressing paratransit and discounted and free fare programs in a new way by the state. Also important to say that we cannot cut our way. The estimates of what would need to be cut to balance the budget if there's no new revenue provided, as you can see here, are catastrophic. We're out of 8 CTA train lines, the majority of CTA buses, 6 out of 11 metro routes, and 70 pace routes. This would make the system not only not a choice for folks who make the choice whether or not to ride every day, it would really undercut people's ability to get to work, youth's ability to get to school, and many others. So cutting our way out of the problem is not an option. We know from what you heard from Senator Villavalem what people want. And through the process that CMAP led through the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, we had a number of areas where the system must be improved, and improving and transforming the system in that way will not just value current people riding the train, it'll get people back who used to ride the train and bus, and it'll attract new riders. And that is what makes the system financially viable for decades and beyond. And that is what will make an impact on reducing GHG emissions. So this particular rider is talking about the financial pressure and how important those reduced fare programs are would be for their family. When we look at what it's going to take to get to the transit system we want, there are a bunch of different areas of work that need to happen. The most important is exceptional service. We need to modernize our governance, our fares, and create ways to speed up our services. There are ways to do it. This is not rocket science. These solutions are all proven and tested. We just have not adapted them wholesale in Illinois in a way that has made the transformation we need. So providing exceptional service, making our system universally accessible. I live on the west branch of the Blue Line. I live there very intentionally to be able to get to my mother, who can no longer take the Blue Line because her stops don't have an elevator and she's in her 80s. And so I had made this really intentional decision to have easy access to my mother, and she no longer has easy access to me. And that we are a global city that does not have universal accessibility. And that doesn't include the challenges with Metro. Our system needs to be safe and comfortable. It needs to be integrated and affordable. For a person riding a transit system, they don't need to figure out, oh, that's a different system and I need different money and it's going to cost something else. They just need to get where they need to go, and they need to get there in a way that makes sense. And our system is structured in a way that is not only not intuitive, it's structured to make you go through a lot of hoops to get where you need to go. And that just doesn't make any sense. And I'll talk for just a second about why that exists. And then we want desirable destinations within reach. Everywhere we have a transit station or a bus hub or a mobility center is an opportunity for economic development. It's an opportunity for affordable housing. It's an opportunity for businesses, food, tree access, and other things. So really thinking about land use and how it relates to our transit system is where we unlock the really powerful potential of it. So through the process that's been going on this past year, it has been determined that we need about $1.5 billion annually to invest in transit operations to transform the system we have today. A lot of the estimates on the current budget gap relate to the system that we're not happy with. So through this process, we dug deep and looked at what do we really need financially to support a system that's going to thrive. So it's not a small dollar amount, but it's also less than what we pay to operate our roadways and our tollways. So we already invest these level of dollars in transportation operations in Illinois. We just haven't been doing it for transit. As I mentioned, our systems aren't well connected. We have 3 operating agencies. We have the CTA, which does bus and rapid transit. We have Metra that does commuter rail, and we have PACE that does suburban bus and paratransit in the city and the suburbs. And for riders, especially those going from the city to the suburbs or suburbs to the city for jobs or services, they experience so many hurdles. We did listening sessions last winter, and I have so many stories about the frustrations of people being stranded, trying to get to work or trying to get home from work, and having to rely on rideshare, which is far more expensive and far less good for the environment. How much time do I have, Danny? I don't know if I have time to get into governance.
I think you have like a couple more minutes.
Okay, cool. So behind the scenes of all this, because it seems obvious that transit is key to our region being a great place to live, it's key to our state's economy. You know, our region is about 75% of the state's economy, and a lot of what draws business here is our transit system and the quality of life related to that. So unfortunately, due to a lot of reasons, we have created a system that we call the spaghetti bowl. It is so hard to understand, and it has made it so hard to change because there are so many agencies and board governing bodies overseeing the system. And they are competing with one another for money, for power, for taxing authority, for authority to spend the dollars they're getting through taxing. And in no way is this, in the way that the system is currently structured, are we centering the needs of employers and riders in it. So we've created a mess. It's been here for about 40 years, and it helps further inequities across the system based on how this spaghetti bowl distributes the money the system brings in through taxation and fares. And it creates all these disincentives to provide good service. So Senator Villavon alluded to this, that our elected officials are saying that we believe in transit. We know we need to save transit. We know we need to pony up more money, but we're not going to do it without reform of this. So while this is like really wonky and there's some fantastic research and reports on this, no fewer than 4 reports have been written that say this needs to be reformed, the spaghetti bowl. And it has not happened to date. But Senator Villavon and other state officials are digging in saying it's going to happen this time. And it really needs to happen. We could do a whole separate session on this. So in the report, there are different solutions. In the part report, there are different solutions as it relates to this. And on governance, the driving solution that we've been talking about in the advocacy community is having one regional agency instead of the RTA, CTA, Metra, and PACE. And centralizing service planning so that the rider and the rider needs and the regional needs are taken into account versus the operating agency needs. So this is a really different way to operate. So this is just a way oversimplified snapshot of what consolidation would be. And at its essence, it would mean there wouldn't be so many boards diluting people's ability to make the system regional. There would be one board and one executive that helps make decisions. There are a lot of really hard battles ahead to identify and commit revenue on the $1.5 billion a year annually. That is not where Illinois has stood out in the past. Every revenue battle in our state has been agonizing, and many really important battles have been lost. So the revenue side of this is going to be really hard, and that transformation of how the system's organized and governed is going to be really hard. That said, for every dollar invested in transit in this region, we get almost $4 back. It is such a good financial investment. It is an absolutely critical equity investment. And it is, as I said, one of our most meaningful things that we can do to reduce GHG from climate change. So we have all the evidence on our side, but I think the battle ahead, as a senator said, as Danny said, is really getting these things across the finish line in a way that really does result in a transformed system. So I'll stop there. I know that was a lot.
Really appreciate the insight, Amy. And there's quite a few questions to chat, but we're gonna wait till the end
Okay.
when after all our presenters have gone, so we can have a more communicative dialogue on these questions. So thank you everyone who's been dropping in questions. I will make sure to bring these back up during our Q&A. But with that, I'm gonna transition us over and pass it over to Larissa, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the issues with data collection, understanding our impact with transportation as it relates to air quality. So Larissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danny. I'm Larissa Kohler, she, her pronouns, and I'm Director of Vehicle Electrification at Environmental Defense Fund. As Danny mentioned, EDF is a global nonprofit organization that seeks sustainable solutions to combat climate change and does so by drawing on expertise in law, policy, economics, and science. In this presentation, I'd like to share some of our research that examines proximity of major sources of pollution, including facilities that use a lot of trucks to bring goods in and out, specifically warehouses, and really evaluate where those truck attracting facilities are relative to vulnerable communities across the state, and also look at the state of monitors that evaluates those pollutants from truck trips. Our work in this area draws on EDF's proximity mapping framework, which is a peer-reviewed method of understanding how the risk from transportation-related air pollution is distributed. The inequities apparent in these proximity maps are consistent with what local communities have long been saying about their neighborhoods. As I'll describe, the impact of harmful pollution in neighborhoods across Illinois has informed a health and equity insights bill that we hope to introduce in January, seeking to identify and address inequities in concert with impacted communities. Next slide. So just to put this in a bit of context, Illinois has one of the highest percentages of mortality from fine particulate matter, also known as PM 2.5, behind only 6 other states in the United States. And this is notable given that fine particulate matter causes a number of significant health impacts, including exacerbating respiratory ailments and contributing to cardiovascular disease and even premature death. Similarly, nitrogen dioxide, of which transportation is a key source, contributes to nearly 10,000 cases of childhood asthma per year in the Chicago metro region alone. Illinois also has the dubious distinction of having among the highest levels of toxic air pollution in the country. Of course, and unfortunately, this pollution doesn't affect all Illinoisans evenly. Communities and individuals living near key sources of pollution, including highways, industrial facilities, and rail yards, face a disproportionate burden on their air quality and health as a result of their proximity to these sources. Unfortunately, these same communities often don't have the data available or sufficient data to help them corroborate their lived experience. More than 25% of estimated mortality burden, for example, is in counties with no monitor for fine particulate matter. Next slide. One of the key pollution sources in Illinois is larger warehouses. So those warehouses over 100,000 square feet. In total, there are well over 2,000 warehouses that generate over 500,000 daily truck trips a day in the state. A large portion of these trips are in the Chicagoland area. Importantly, the 2 million people living within a half mile of a warehouse are much more likely to be populations of color, with Black and Hispanic/Latino populations being 37% and 95% more likely to live nearer to these sources than expected based on statewide statistics. Emissions from truck attracting facilities can be particularly harmful, given that vehicles are often idling and traveling at low speed near these facilities, which can release significant pollution and is often underrepresented in pollution assessments. Moreover, these heavy-duty trucks, many of which come to and from warehouses on a daily basis, compose 7% of the vehicles on roads in Illinois, while also being responsible for 67% of the transportation sector's nitrogen oxide emissions and fully 57% of fine particulate matter. Next slide. As I mentioned before, science has tied children's asthma to air pollution. A growing body of peer-reviewed research published within the last 5 years indicates that exposure to nitrogen dioxide, and again, this is something that transportation is a key source of, both exacerbates and causes asthma, and the harms from nitrogen dioxide are unevenly concentrated in particular communities. Black children are 5 times more likely to be hospitalized for asthma and 8 times more likely to die from asthma as compared to non-Hispanic white children. Due to legacies of redlining and other discriminatory policies, new and existing warehouses and the roads that serve them are disproportionately located in proximity to communities of color and low-income communities. Next slide. Unfortunately, while warehouses keep proliferating in the state, the monitors aren't keeping pace. Monitors are represented here by the red dots, while the green dots are fine particulate matter monitors and the blue dots monitor nitrogen dioxide. It's easy to say that monitors are both insufficient in number and not always situated in areas where they're set up to collect meaningful information. That is, they're not located near key sources of pollution. Actually, of the 37 EPA grade monitors that are in the state, 18 only collect samples once a day, and only 10 are within half a mile of a warehouse. The number of monitors in the state, moreover, has actually gone down between 2005 and 2022, despite the addition of 615 warehouses in that same span of time. That's a ratio of 65 warehouses for every 1 monitor as of 2022, down 61% compared to 2005. The bottom line is that there is not sufficient monitoring in the state to adequately reflect the scale of the problem. Next slide. And then before I delve into the details of the bill, just wanted to give a snapshot of warehouse locations in Cook County. By the numbers, there are approximately 1.3 million people living within a half mile of the 847 warehouses in the area, which means they're exposed to 148,000 daily truck trips. The statistics here are a stark reminder that some Illinois residents are much more significantly impacted. There are 87,000 children near warehouses whose developing lungs make them much more vulnerable to air pollution. In addition, Black and Hispanic/Latino populations live near warehouses at rates 64% and 131% higher, respectively, than would be expected based on statewide statistics, with low-income individuals living near warehouses at rates 39% higher than would be expected based on those same statewide statistics. Next slide. Finally, I wanted to flag this bill that I referenced. EDF is working with the Illinois Environmental Council to establish a mechanism that seeks to remedy the gaps and starts to chip away at the pervasive and unevenly distributed pollution across the state. While the bill is still a work in progress and we're getting input from a variety of stakeholders, prioritizing community and environmental justice advocates among those voices, the bill has a few major elements. This bill would strengthen available data by expanding the monitoring network and making data collection continuous, as well as incorporating the work that communities have done to gather data, including mobile monitoring and truck counts that demonstrate the severity of truck traffic and resulting pollution. In addition, the bill requires that data to become actionable. Data has to be public and in a format that is easily understandable by state residents. It provides grants to communities to work with the state on local monitoring deployment, further strengthening data collection and providing an opportunity for workforce development. And finally, the promulgation of additional data will be used to identify and hold polluters accountable. So we're not just stopping at collecting data. We will use that data to build policy solutions that are directly informed by impacted communities, these same communities will also continue to have a hand in implementation. Policy solutions include increased investment in zero-emission vehicles and associated charging and fueling infrastructure, putting decarbonization requirements in place for large warehouses, prioritizing those areas that are identified by communities for investment, and using enhanced data for those same disproportionately impacted communities. So all in all, we are expanding monitoring, using that data to build actionable policy solutions, and making sure that communities are intimately involved in the development and implementation of those policies. So I will stop there and turn it back over to Danny, but looking forward to questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have a few trickling in the chat, but we'll make sure we'll circle back to these in just a little bit. And with us tonight, rounding out our conversation on transportation policies is Mohammed Patel from Natural Resources Defense Council. Mohammed, I'll turn it over to you to talk about electrification.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. Hey, everyone. Great to see you all this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the electrification policies that we can pursue here in Illinois, and what the benefits of some of those policies will be. So, broadly speaking, the policies that I'm going to talk about are shooting for electrifying the transportation system, which, as we know, is the leading cause of climate change emissions in Illinois. And as Larissa was just talking about, a very leading cause of nitrogen oxide and PM 2.5 emissions, which have really big public health implications. So there's an imperative to electrify our vehicle sector, most importantly for the public health of our communities and also to fight climate change. Now, if we are able to enact some of the policies that I'm about to talk about, and get some more clean power in place, according to the American Lung Association, we can save a significant number of lives by 2050. So in general, vehicles really do affect Black and brown communities more than white communities. People of color are 3.5 times more likely to live in a county with poor air quality. And 1 in 3 Americans in general just live with unhealthy air pollution, a large part because of transportation. So a lot of those polluted cities happen to be in the Midwest, and Chicago, it happens to be one of the leading cities with air pollution. So if we are able to enact some of these policies, as you can see on the table on the right, it'll lead to billions of dollars of public health benefits. And when we say public health benefits, we mean not only avoided premature deaths, which is near 5,000, but also lost work days, ER visits, and general minor cases of illness, all of which accumulate to this really large number, and put money back in people's pockets because they're not worried about the health of their lungs. So that's overall the benefits of these clean vehicle policies. And as you can see, as we compare to the rest other states around us in the Midwest, that we do have the most to benefit from adopting a lot of these policies. So thinking about it holistically, this is a graphic from the California Air Resources Board. But how do we transition? Well, first and foremost, we have to surround everything we do by centering equity and environmental justice, making sure that we're targeting investments and solutions in the communities that need them most. But our foundational policies have to do with maximizing zero-emission vehicle sales. And ZEV here means zero-emission vehicle. So we want to increase the amount of vehicle sales, reach some more market certainty so that we can begin to invest in a lot of other things that will help us make this transition, like charging infrastructure, for example. The second thing is to make sure we're building high-quality zero-emission vehicles. So are they going to be full replacements for combustion vehicles? They last as long? Are they as easy to use? And then lastly, making the gas vehicles that we're going to need to use in this transition period fully emit less. And that's both on the NOx and PM side, but also on the carbon emission side. So taking this holistically, we can really look at how do we switch from a carbon intensive combustion vehicle economy over to a clean vehicle economy. So just taking a look at a lot of the investment that's been happening, I think if you follow the transportation space and look at the energy news, you'll often see new investments coming up, not only in America, but around the world. So there's a lot of momentum building around the world. Europe has invested a ton in the past few years and have set really stringent targets for transitioning their vehicles to zero emission. I specifically highlight Germany in that because Germany has a very similar car culture to the United States, where they're very heavily dependent on cars and they travel a lot. And as you can see, they're quite far ahead in terms of just their new sales that they're selling as zero emission. To put that into context, Illinois has about 3 to 5% of their new sales as zero emission at the moment. So about a quarter of that is where we're at now. And as you can see from the graph on the top right, this has really jumped into high gear in recent years. So we're seeing really unprecedented growth in this space. But the US isn't necessarily falling behind. The IRA and the IIJA have invested a ton into this. The Biden administration has set strong targets for this sector. In Illinois specifically, we've already seen some manufacturing be invested here in the state with the Lion and the Rivian factories producing medium and heavy duty vehicles, and the new battery factory that was announced recently for Kankakee County. And on the bottom right, you can see a figure from Atlas Public Policy. They have a new interactive map which shows you EV investments and where they are. And as you can see, Illinois does have a few, but there are a lot occurring in our neighboring states in the Midwest. And we are, trying to get more. A lot of this, and this just gives you a little bit of a bigger view where a lot of this investment is happening. But they're beyond the government investments, there's been a lot of private investment as well. Ford, GM, Stellantis, all of these really big car companies, the big three, have committed to investing billions of dollars in this transition. So jumping more specifically into the vehicle space, I'm going to start with, clean trucks. So that's medium and heavy duty vehicles, move on to clean cars, and then round it out by talking about charging. So when we're talking about medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification, there are two main policies that we are pursuing at the moment in Illinois. Both of them are coming out of California under the Clean Air Act, which allows us to set vehicle emission standards that are more stringent than the baseline federal standard. In order to do that, we need to adopt what California has already adopted. And these policies are called the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule and the Heavy Duty Omnibus Rule. So this has benefits of adopting advanced clean trucks, but it's also the heavy duty omnibus rule. And I'll talk a little bit about what those policies do in a second, but broad strokes, adopting these will have significant public health benefits, as I mentioned earlier, and it will realize significant cost savings for zero emission vehicle and fleet owners in general. But as you can see from this graph on the top, if we adopt this, we'll see a really strong rise in these zero emission vehicles in use in the state. But again, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and it's a transition as the fleets turn over. But corresponding with that, you'll see a significant drop in the emissions of the transportation sector and the medium and heavy duty vehicle sector specifically. Talking more about what these policies do, the first one is the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation, or ACT. This, going back to increasing zero emission vehicle sales, that foundational policy that I talked about earlier, this requires manufacturers to gradually increase the amount of sales as a percentage of their total vehicle sales over time within the state. So what does that mean? It means that for different vehicle classes, so that's class 2B to 3, which is heavy duty pickup trucks and vans, class 4 to 8, box trucks, non-tractor trailers, things that you see driving around the city a lot. And then lastly, class 7 and 8 tractor trailers, those long haul big trucks that you see driving on the interstate highways. Basically, the percentages for each of those classes slowly increases over time. Like I said earlier, we're sitting at a very low percentage of current sales. And what this does is it tells manufacturers that in the state of Illinois, you have to sell more of these vehicles. And what that does is it sends a clear market signal to the private sector. So it tells the private sector, hey, we're ready to buy and sell zero emission vehicles here in Illinois. You should and can start investing in charging infrastructure, building out the necessary landscape to make these vehicles really successful. And it does it in a way that makes sense. It allows for early crediting from manufacturers, and it is a gradual increase over time, ending in 2035 at around 55% on average, up to 75%, depending on the vehicle class of new sales. Now, this does not require anyone to buy a zero emission vehicle. It just is requiring manufacturers to sell these vehicles. And several other states around the country have adopted this rule already. So that's that foundational increase ZEV sales. The second piece on the medium and heavy duty side is the heavy duty omnibus regulation. And what this does, it gets at that top piece that I was talking about earlier and reducing the emissions of existing combustion vehicles. So we know that it's going to take a second to transition all the way over to zero emission, but we can't let diesel engines continue polluting in the way they have been. As you heard from Larissa, they have a really big impact on public health. So what this rule does is it makes manufacturers update their diesel engines for the next several years as the transition is occurring. So essentially, it makes them cleaner. And as you can see from the bottom right, it significantly reduces the NOx coming out of these engines, which has really advantageous public health benefits. In general, it makes them the warranty requirements longer. So these vehicles will hopefully last just as long, be cleaner, and at the same time be cleaner in more different operating circumstances. It's a very wonky regulation, but the main thing is that it's going to improve the quality of the diesel engines that we will continue to sell over the next several years as we transition to zero emission. The next piece is on the light duty side. So much more folks are familiar with sort of how we get around on a day-to-day basis with our personal vehicles. And the policy here is very similar to the Advanced Clean Trucks rule in terms of function. It's called the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule. I'm going to start with showing you sort of the number of states that have adopted it. As you can see, the light blue is showing Advanced Clean Cars 1 standard, which just started in recent years, but functions very similarly. And then the green cars show that Advanced Clean Cars 2 standard, those states that have adopted it, which I'm going to talk about now. Broadly speaking, the benefits of adopting Advanced Clean Cars 2 are just as high, if not higher, than Advanced Clean Trucks. When it comes to the public health benefits, billions of dollars, avoided premature deaths, avoided ER visits, and significant savings for EV owners. So it says up to $21,000 in vehicle lifetime savings. So between buying a combustion vehicle and buying a zero emission vehicle, by 2050, you'll see up to $21,000 over the lifetime of those vehicles in savings if you had bought the EV over the internal combustion engine. And what this policy results in is, as you can see from the top graph, a really large increase in the in-use zero-emission vehicles in the state. And that's important because we have a goal of having 1 million EVs on the road in Illinois. So this is a really critical policy to helping us get there. And as those vehicles increase, we remove tailpipe emissions and we see significant drops in the carbon emissions of these light-duty vehicles. But Advanced Clean Cars 2, it functions very similarly to the Advanced Clean Trucks, although it has some added complexity with the crediting mechanisms. But essentially, it requires manufacturers to sell an increasing number of these vehicles to make them available in the state, to send a clear market signal to other, charging infrastructure and other zero-emission vehicle investors that these vehicles are coming, and it helps bring down the overall cost of the vehicles by making them more available and achieving economies of scale. So the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy as a whole increases the number of zero-emission vehicles that are available. It increases the stringency of the gasoline vehicles that are going to be built from now on. So similar to how the heavy-duty omnibus regulates the NOx emissions coming out of trucks, the low-emission vehicle requirement as part of ACC2 will help make gasoline cars more efficient and emit less overall, which is really important. As you can see from these bullets, there are several flexibilities, is what they're calling them, to help manufacturers achieve compliance. So they can sell vehicles early in the state, give themselves credits so that they can meet these set percentage requirements, and things like that. But there's also environmental justice crediting and flexibility. So should a manufacturer invest in selling lower cost vehicles within environmental justice communities, they can earn credits if they sell lower cost vehicles to community car share programs and provide related incentives to low income customers. They can achieve credits as well. Lastly, going to touch charging a little bit, but it is one of the bigger questions when we're talking about this transition is how are we going to fuel these vehicles? And this is a map from the Electric Power Research Institute with their new tool that's hopefully coming out soon that shows if we are to 100% electrify all of the light duty and medium duty vehicles what that draw on power would look like. And as you can see, there's a really big red spot in Chicago because we have so much freight moving, but also just we have a lot of cars and we're a major metropolitan area. And in Illinois in general, as you can see, compared to the rest of the country, Illinois does have a lot of these dots around there. So there's going to be a lot of power needed. So we have to plan for that. We have to make sure we're investing in charging infrastructure and making it cost effective to charge your vehicle. This is another piece from EPRI, and this shows the heavy duty side. This looked at heavy duty Class 8 Daimler trucks, and it took telematics data from on-road internal combustion engines, so looking where these vehicles are actually traveling, and it estimated were we to convert those vehicles, what the power draw would be. And as you can see in the bottom right, Chicago, they estimate 32 megawatts of future load, which is a really large amount of power. And as you can see, the distribution is known of where these vehicles are traveling. So we can then infer where should we build this charging to make the investments make sense, to make them stick one time and allow utilities to plan ahead for this coming load. Another thing I just wanted to mention, broadly speaking, is that a lot of folks might think that a lot more EVs on the grid would result in higher rates for everyone. But luckily, the opposite is true and has already been noted in Illinois. So the benefit of EV charging is that it provides significant revenues, and those revenues outweigh the costs of building out that EV infrastructure. And what that results in is lower rates and bills on your electric bill. So what Synapse Energy Economics did a study throughout the whole country, and they did individual state data. But what they found in Illinois was from 2011 to 2021, over that 10-year period, EV revenues contributed $30 million more than the associated costs of building that infrastructure. So we know that they're providing more benefit overall to ratepayers because those revenues are being brought back to us in the form of lower rates than the costs of actually building that infrastructure. Beyond that, there are some forward-looking analyses that look at some of the policies I mentioned earlier, like ACT and ACC2. And what those found is that that could also save average commercial and residential customers money on their bill by 2050. So overall, EV charging will hopefully be a benefit to all ratepayers, even despite the large investment that will be required for us to meet this build out. And when we talk about some of the solutions for this, there are several policies being proposed around the country, but a few have been identified by the National EV Charging Initiative, which is a large initiative with many different stakeholders, including nonprofits, community-based organizations, EJ organizations, labor, and truck manufacturers that have all come together to sort of look at what are the solutions for these challenges we're facing with charging. And luckily, Illinois has already implemented some of these utility programs and investments, very similar to our beneficial electrification plans that we have under CEJA, which are investing dollars into programs to really close that gap in cost for customers. And also rates designed for commercial charging, also in CEJA. And make-ready rules are also covered a little bit in CEJA, but there are other things that we can do to really make this process move faster, including policies to get it built and energized. Problems that are currently coming up in other parts of the country where trucks are being purchased by companies to be used, but they're not able to get the power fast enough from the utility to their site to be able to use those trucks. So if we put specific timelines on that and specific requirements around when charging should be built and how the utilities should plan for the expected load, those red dots I mentioned earlier, that can really help us get ahead of that problem ever needing to happen in Illinois. So I know I covered a lot there, but those are some of the policies that we're looking at for electrification on clean trucks, clean cars, and on EV charging. So thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. And yeah, there was a lot between all three presentations, but I think something to underscore is how linked they all are. If we do advance clean trucks, that also includes buses, which will be a big portion of what would be happening with a regional transit agency that, maybe not the RTA, but a regional agency that governs, will be able to procure more buses for PACE and the city of Chicago. And then, we can see some of the reductions from the data that we've seen. So thank you, everyone, so far who's asked questions. Right now, we're going to turn it over to that Q&A portion. So know there's been a couple questions already shared in the chat, but for anyone else, do want to mention that feel free to use the raise your hand function to ask a question, come off mute. I don't think anyone's dialing in, but if you are, *9 to raise or lower your hand, or *6 to mute and unmute yourself. The first question, and it's kind of a double layer question, and it's going to you, Amy, is as far as the funding goes, there were a couple things that people wanted to get some clarifiers on. Ellen asked, where did Metro find funds to increase service by 8%? And the other question comes in is, this 1.5 billion that we're needing, is that set for a specific duration, or is this in perpetuity moving forward?
So Metra, I think, funded their service expansion through innovation and a lot of different ways. Metra is the commuter rail system, and they have a few different challenges. It is by far the most expensive type of transit to operate, by hundreds of dollars per mile. It's the most expensive transit to electrify. So they have a lot of challenges. But the hardest is they don't own the rail tracks they operate on. So freight rail owns them and has priority. So their service has to be negotiated through all the freight coming through our region. So they've gotten better and been able to make some cases, but they've also done something really important, which is more weekend and evening service when there's less freight. And that's what riders wanted. We also worked with them in Cook County on what we call the Fair Fares pilot. If you're riding transit in the city or Metro in the city, it can cost double or even more to take Metro the same distance as CTA. The systems aren't equitably fared. So we worked on a Fair Fares pilot and focused on South Side and South Suburb and access to jobs. So folks from the South Side could get to all of those jobs that have been burgeoning in the South suburbs. And so that pilot lowered fares and equalized them with CTA, created better transfers with PACE. We essentially created regional transit through this pilot. And but Cook County had to pay for it. What was really important and interesting through the pandemic is that those are the Metro lines that thrived. They did like head and shoulders above all the other Metro lines because those workers absolutely needed to go to work and to ride transit to get there. So they've been open to some innovation, especially when other people are paying for it, be it Cook County or the federal government. And then the 1.5 billion. So on the funding side, there will be a time that we'll do with ICJC a much deeper dive on the money side of things, because it is going to be really hard and really important that as we create solutions for how to fund this, that equity and climate are our driving decision lenses that we're using. And so so stay tuned on that. But in short, I'll just say that 1.5 billion is every year, and it would grow somewhat from year to year based on what it costs to hire all the people that run the system. So with labor costs and with fuel costs right now, while they're relying on fuel.
Thank you so much, Amy. And for folks, ICJC is the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which I think all of our presenters are part of the coalition, and we're working collaboratively to put together a clean and equitable transportation campaign for all y'all. So the information's gathering up, and we'll be really excited to present some of this information in the upcoming weeks. I have one question coming up from Ellen in regards to air monitoring. So Larissa, I think this one will be perfect for you. I think there's some concerns about, the lack of air monitoring around the warehouses. And I think we were a little curious to hear a little bit about what community air monitoring has looked like or could look like, and if there's any additional thoughts on maybe permitting practices for warehouses so they're not in proximity to Black and brown communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Ellen, for that question. So maybe I'll just start with the first part. I do think definitely there has been a really robust role for community monitoring. So that includes things like mobile monitoring, so putting packs on that monitor air pollution, and doing things like truck counts. So community organizations have stood on roadways and then physically counted the trucks that go in and out of their neighborhoods. And I think that's been really effective and I think very evocative of the burden of air pollution on these communities. A lot of the monitors that I've been referencing today are what are known as regulatory grade monitors. So those are monitors that are specified by the EPA to be the highest accuracy monitors for regulatory purposes. But certainly we want any and all information, and that's definitely part of the impetus of this bill. We want the regulatory grade monitors, but we also want community efforts and mobile and community monitoring to be part of the sort of compendium of information that we're using to create policy solutions. And then in terms of permitting, I think, yeah, absolutely, there's a role for permitting. We've seen Chicago come up with a cumulative impact ordinance that hopefully they'll start to put into practice in the coming months, that really looks at whether it's appropriate to provide permits to facilities that are located in communities that have historically and today suffer disproportionate burden from industrial facilities and truck attracting warehouses and that sort of thing. So I definitely think there's a place for that. And I think there's potentially even a place for tying emissions to fines. So if a particular warehouse, after it's been in the neighborhood, is seen to be one of the top emitter for particular pollutants, then maybe using fees from that particular facility to enact solutions to mitigate that emissions, I think is something we should also be considering. I don't know if that answers your question, Ellen. Happy to provide any additional context or follow-up questions.
I think Ellen might have actually dropped before,
Okay.
but we will definitely.
I hope
that
it's
she gets
informative for the
the
rest of you.
answer. Yeah. I mean, we're recording this for a particular reason, so we'll be sure to make sure she gets that. If there's any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand. I do have a couple more that would love to just chat. Larissa, you raised a really good question. I think this might be a question that could be directed to each one of our presenters, of thinking about a city or location that could serve as a model for Chicago or Illinois as it relates to either public transit service, as it relates to electrification progress, as it relates to air monitoring around warehousing. So why don't we start off with Mohammed, and then I'll turn it over to Amy and then Larissa.
Yeah, I think with the policies that I talked about, especially the clean vehicle standards, there are a lot of examples. I think up to 18 states, I don't know if that's the right number, but have adopted variety of these clean vehicle regulations. I think 8 or 9 have adopted the Advanced Clean Trucks, and a few more have adopted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule. So states like New York, New Jersey, California, Washington, Oregon, New Mexico is currently hearing advanced clean trucks and advanced clean cars as well. Maine just heard it, Maryland. So I think there's a lot of different examples that we can pull from. I think that if we're wanting to maximize our zero emission vehicle sales, New York and California have done a really good job of that. Especially if you don't want to look at California as an example, then you can look at New York as an example. But really what we need to get at is, I think broadly speaking, this transition is going to cross state lines, right? Like no matter what, vehicles travel across state lines and within the state as well. So if you're thinking about it from a purely Illinois perspective, you can think of it like there are only a certain amount of zero emission vehicles that can really be sold across the US at any point in time as manufacturing continues to ramp up. If we want to meet our goals here in Illinois to get a certain amount of vehicles on the road, adopting these policies is going to be a critical part of that, right? If we're going to build the vehicles in Illinois, like at Line and Rivian, if we're going to build the batteries in Illinois, like in Kankakee with the new Goshen factory, we should also sell the vehicles in Illinois so that we're not exporting these benefits of zero emission vehicles to states that have adopted these regulations. Because what you're going to see in a few years is the states that have adopted these regulations, manufacturers are going to send their first choice zero emission vehicles to those states because in those states, they're required to sell them. So that might mean less vehicles available if we don't adopt them. So adopting them is a really great way to ensure long-term that we have the vehicles available, that they can be available for purchase. And I can't emphasize this enough, the clear market signal to show that infrastructure and companies can begin to invest, and utilities especially can begin to invest in this transition.
Great, thank you so much, Mohammed. Amy, I think you started answering this question in the chat. Are there any particular Asian cities or European cities that you're really excited to look at as a potential model for public transit?
Some days it feels like every other city. Tonight when I got really motion sick on my train, I was feeling pretty sad about it. But in Asia, there's like a few standout cities: Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, and then a ton of cities in Europe. You might not expect like Zurich, but also, you know, Paris, Berlin, London. Canada, you know, I think when we look to people on our continent, Toronto is doing much better than us. And a lot of other US cities are doing much better than us in terms of getting ridership back. So we are definitely towards the end of the pack right now, and we don't need to be at the end of the pack. We have one of the best bus networks you could have. We have a street grid that people dream of when they think about planning, but we just haven't maximized it or invested in it in a way that would take us to the next level.
Thank you. I think, yeah, to your point, we can't be in the back of the pack anymore. We're striving to be a global city. Like we can definitely get there. And it is going to take everyone on this call to be an advocate and ally with us to make sure that we are driving those messages forward. Larissa, would love to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about other places you've seen air monitoring do it well.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are a lot of cities that are really starting to recognize the immense burden of air pollution and trying to collect better data. I think one example that I'll highlight is London. London has a program called Breathe London, where they're working with the community, recognizing that regulatory grade monitors, I think, are probably the most accurate, but aren't necessarily accessible for everyone. They're actually deploying monitors around the city based on feedback from community members, and I think in some cases funding those monitors, and really presenting a clearer picture of the pollution burden in London. For anyone that's been to London, I think they can sense immediately sort of the industrialization of the city and how polluted it is, and that is starting to change, I think, with the better collection of data. And London also has an ultra low emission zone that now circles the entirety of the greater London area, and is really just focused on making sure that the vehicles going in and out of the greater London area are zero emission or ultra low emission. And that has contributed greatly to reducing the emissions burden of those vehicles. And that's everything from passenger vehicles, as I understand it, to heavy duty goods vehicles. So that's one example. Also flag one policy that I think is has potential for being expanded across the United States. The South Coast Air Quality Management District, which is an air pollution control district, so to speak, in California, has passed something called the indirect source rule, So the indirect sources in this case are warehouses, and what this rule does is really focus in on the trucks that are going in and out of those warehouses. And each warehouse that's above 100,000 square feet is allocated a specific number of points that they have to offset with specific activities. And those activities are things like installing charging stations for electric vehicles or purchasing electric vehicles. And if they don't have sufficient activity to meet those points, then they have to pay a fine. So that's, I think, demonstrating that these truck attracting facilities have to change their ways, but also making sure that they're inspired monetarily to do so. And if they have to pay a fee, that is allocated towards activities that continue to facilitate the transition to zero emission vehicles.
Thanks, Larissa. I will love to see if there's any additional questions from the audience tonight. We still have a few minutes, so we can take 1 or 2 additional questions. Alexandria, feel free to come off mute.
Hi, sorry you can't see me. My house is a disaster right now. But I was wondering, so with the electrification, how is the, like, how are we going to add in all of these additional utilities? Like, won't that call for an entire, like, reformatting of the grid for these charging stations? Or is this something that we're already considering when we're, like, trenching down 55, let's say? Like, is this already in the works?
I think that's a really good point. I think to a certain extent, it is. I don't think to that level where we're like trying to co-create with existing infrastructure, which is what we should do, right? And what some of these model policies will hopefully get at is, if you saw some of the graphs I was showing earlier around like where this load is going to happen, we need policies that can tell utilities, hey, you know that this is going to happen. You should start building now and plan ahead for it. Because right now, the way utilities operate is they wait for someone to build all of their charging infrastructure and then call them and say, hey, can we get this connected to the grid? But that's going to take way too long. And that's going to require costly upgrades in some cases. But if you can estimate where that load is going to be, and I think you bring up a great point, like entrenching I-55, right? We know that a lot of truck traffic is probably going to happen along that corridor. We can identify with telematics data where those trucks are ending up right now as internal combustion engines. So with that, can a utility begin investing in transformers and distribution grid upgrades to be able to make that area suitable for electric charging? That's what we need to get at. Right now, they don't plan for it like that. And that's sort of where the policy solution can hopefully exist.
So then along those lines, and this might be another conversation entirely, has there ever been a discussion about trying to aggregate these projects so that we're not increasing our energy load, our emissions during all of these different construction like events? So when we have water coming in and digging out 2 months later after we had electric coming through, I mean, has that ever been a discussion? Because that seems like a lot of unnecessary construction being done that's just perpetuating the problem that we already have.
Yeah, I'm not specifically aware of any policy that's gotten at that. I don't know, Larissa or Amy, if you all have come across that.
Yeah, not specifically. I will say that I think, as Mohammed alluded to, or just said specifically, not even alluded to, I think like planning by utilities is so important, because I think future-proofing sites to avoid having to dig and do work again is something that we're actively encouraging utilities to do to minimize that impact and those emissions from having to do that. And I think it'll also save fleets that are seeking to transition to zero emission costs too, because you dig once and then you avoid costs from having to dig multiple times. So that's definitely something we're working with utilities and utility commissions to try and do. And I will say also, just in terms of load and demand on the grid, Mohammed's exactly right that there will be impact on the grid that we'll need to plan for, but I think there are also steps that utilities can take to try and mitigate to a certain extent that impact by by putting in rates in place that'll align charging with when there are greater renewable energy on the system and at times when demand is lower. So in that way, hopefully we can cut a bit against that demand. And then by using things like distributed solar and other resources that can connect but don't have to connect to the grid, I think you'll also start to chip away hopefully a little bit at that increased demand.
Thank you both.
Just add that when it comes to the big transportation picture, reducing vehicle miles traveled is a key part of the solution. And so if we're just replacing every fossil fuel vehicle with an electric vehicle, we're losing the bigger environmental battle because the harms of vehicles go beyond just GHGs. And we talked about particulate matter, but the loss of life is profound, and the cost of that loss of life, as well as just crashes and other things. So, and producing all the things that things that go into making these cars and batteries aren't good for the environment either. So there's like, transportation's a big conundrum. It is a big problem, and it's like a multi-tentacled solution. And so I hope at the end of the day, with sort of the strength of the thinking and leadership in Illinois, we're going to end up with a transportation system that's cleaner and has far fewer people relying on driving as their sole way to get around. And they feel safer and freer to walk, to bike, and to use transit. So sorry, I soapboxed it a little, but it's like a comprehensive.
No, I understand. Amy, so whatever happened with the speed rail going from Chicago downstate? What happened to that project?
So now you can get to Springfield on high-speed rail at 120 miles an hour. So they're slowly building out the tracks required to handle higher speed trains. And I think actually through our transit work, at the state level, there's going to be an opportunity to unlock regional rail, intercity rail, and high-speed rail. But it's a journey that I think actually holds more promise now than it has in a while, because all the federal money is for infrastructure. And there's so much of it. And so some of our policy solutions are about driving those dollars away from just roadways and into other solutions. So hopefully things will start to look and feel different.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, no, Alexander, you're asking some really good questions. I do want to say that we're near the top of the hour where we're going to come to a close, but a lot of what we presented tonight isn't in a silo in the work that we do with IAC. Alexander, you were asking really good questions regarding the grid upgrades and other utility questions that we really need to be answering, and would love for folks to come on November 1st to our Clean Energy Town Hall, where we'll have more experts talking about those issues that can really help us build out the infrastructure we need for some of the transportation projects that we're looking to do. So once again, I want to thank everyone tonight for coming, spending some time with us tonight, and to our presenters for the great insight that they were able to provide. If you all do have any additional questions for them, please feel free to drop me a line. I will drop my email in the chat. So anyone who, if there was something else that was left unsaid or something that sit with you tonight that you think about in the morning, feel free to send that along, and I'll be sure to connect with our presenters to get those questions answered. So once again, November 1st on Wednesday, we will have our Clean Energy Town Hall, and we hope to see all of you at that town hall. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and so we can all say goodbye, and thank you all for the wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Have a good night.